When we think about lethal force, lethal or deadly force, is that force likely or intended to cause death or great harm? And note I said intended. Death doesn't necessarily have to be a consequence for you to be justified in using lethal force to defend yourself. Certainly, we can imagine that if we're using someone who's using a baseball bat against us, that we can reasonably assume that we're going to have some broken bones and we can maybe also have a fractured skull and eventually die. But maybe we're not going to. So when we start to formulate the actions and the thoughts about when we can use lethal force in the law, it's a subjective test, meaning it's what I think, not what the rest of this room thinks until we get to the jury, and then we'll talk about that. So great harm in the form of a broken arm is enough for serious bodily injury to use lethal force because it's reasonable to think that something else could happen. So in the definition of lethal force, it's a force likely or intended to cause death or great harm. Now I always say, where have we read this before? If anybody's familiar with your own state statutes of when you can use lethal force or use self-defense against actions, and almost every state statute that talks about lethal force, you can always find the words, you're in fear or honestly believe of immediate unavoidable death or serious bodily injury. And now I'm going to focus on this for a while. If you reasonably and honestly believe that you're in fear of immediate unavoidable death or serious bodily injury, you can use lethal force. That is the defining line we're going to talk about. That is the key. And I add unavoidable for those states that have a duty to retreat. I live in Ohio where I have a duty to retreat. So even once I make the decision that I'm in fear of death or serious bodily injury or harm, right now what's going to happen and I can't do anything about it, I have to think about one more thing. Do I have a duty to retreat and can I safely retreat? And we'll define what safely means too, because that's an important part of what we need to think about. That's why your response is to why'd you kill, why'd you pull your gun, why'd you brandish, why'd you do this in self-defense? It's always going to be the same thing. The answer is always going to be the same thing, because I was in fear of death or serious bodily injury. And it's that simple, but at the same time, it can be that difficult.
If you own or carry a gun, you owe it to yourself and your family to be totally prepared. Second Call Defense gives you complete legal protection for armed self-defense. It's the most comprehensive protection for armed self-defense in America. Join Second Call Defense today.